Hello, everyone. I'm Athena Phillips, and I'm co-president of Citrus Chapter of Florida Native Plant Society. Welcome near and far, wherever you are. My co-president, Sue Wasserman, is with us tonight in the background, facilitating all of our technical needs. So she's there, but you get to see me tonight. If you have comments or questions during our program, just go ahead and make them. We can see them, and we'll make sure we get to them as we go along. Just a quick membership report. We have 124 members currently, which is a little bit of a dip. So if your membership renewal has slid by unintentionally, please, we'll remind you to please go ahead and support the chapter. And we look forward to any new members. If you're interested in joining or you want to know more about it, please give us an email or a call. Our contact information is on our website. I do want to quickly say a congratulations to Pinellas chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society for successfully raising awareness and money to buy the Gladys Douglas Hackworth Preserve in Pinellas County. This is a great success. It was targeted for conservation, but nobody made the move on it. And then finally, some developers were going to develop it, and through the good works of a lot of people, it was successfully purchased, and the county is turning it into a very much needed conservation parcel. So congratulations, Pinellas chapter. And speaking of chapters making it happen, we actually, our own chapter, has a lot of volunteer opportunities this month. Spring has sprung, and the chapter is going a little crazy. If you would like to help volunteer with the chapter, we sent this out in the email. But we have 2 different days at the beginning and the end of the month at Fort Cooper State Park. The chapter is helping the friends there do an installation of a couple of native beds. So we'd definitely be interested, if you're on that side of the county, to come out and help us with that. You can call or text Sue. Then we also are starting back our Weedy Wednesday at Crystal River Preserve. March is here, and winter is kind of over, so it's time to get back out there and do some spring cleaning. You can come on March 10th, starting at 9 a.m. We're going to be at the Visitor Center doing the demo garden there. Then Barbara, our guest speaker tonight, she's managing the Lecanto demo garden at the Cooperative Extension Office, and she will be doing a work day on March 13th. So if you want to come out and learn a little hands-on with Barbara, come out and help clean up the gardens and tidy things up. I was out there yesterday, and everything looked pretty good. It's not really weedy, but there's always a little bit of clearing of the paths and things like that. And then our very first outreach of the year, we haven't been doing many of these at all, but we are going to be doing the spring home and outdoor show at the depot in Inverness. It's a park out in the downtown area, and it's just one day. We've got 2 different shifts. I'll be doing the morning shift, and Sue will be doing the afternoon shift. You can get questions answered if you're new to native gardening. We sit there and socialize a little in between getting visited by the people that are coming to the home and garden show. And it's a great opportunity just to kind of familiarize yourself with the chapter. We really encourage new members to come and participate in that. Then we also have the invasive plant removal that we've been participating with Lake Beautyberry chapter. So if you want to go out and help remove some invasive plants, I'm usually attending those, so you'd get to hang out with me and Levon Silvernell, who's the Lake Beautyberry person, and we should be having some Hernando people coming as well. So it's a small group, but it's a nice mix, and you get to meet people from other chapters. So I hope you guys, somebody can help out with those. Basically, any of our volunteer opportunities, as we put contact information there, but if all else fails, just go ahead and contact the chapter at the contact information at the website, and we can always put you in contact with the right person. And I would like to also remind everyone that our board, most of us have reached the end of our terms. So we really need people to step up and volunteer to help take on some of the roles in the chapter board. So we have president, chapter rep, treasurer, membership, and secretary are all coming up for election in November and start in January. So now is the best time to start learning the ropes. None of it's very hard, but it is a regular commitment. So you can see what is entailed in doing it, while the current person is responsible for everything. So if you have an interest in helping take one of the leadership positions of the chapter, I kindly ask you to contact us at our email address or at our phone, and you can then find out a little bit more information about what's entailed. Like I said, it's nothing really much, other than a regular commitment to make the chapter continue run from month to month. So the other things that I would like to get to, because not only do we have our volunteer opportunities, but we also have our regular monthly activities. So this month we are having a field trip out to the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway. It's just over the county line in Dunellen, and it's a very nice place. A lot of diversity there. They've been doing some restoration, and it's a very popular bike trail as well. But our speaker for next month is Deborah Curry, and she will be talking about Marion County chapters work out there to monitor the rare plants and some of the restoration efforts that they're participating in out there. And as part of that presentation that she'll be doing, she's going to do a field trip for us this month at the end of the week, or Tuesday actually I should say, but in about a week. And I was talking to her today, and it sounds really interesting. It's going to be a little hands-on, and we're going to get to go out and look at some different plants and try to find the plants that they're currently looking for to see if they're existing. So it's going to be interesting. So if you'd like to join that field trip, you have to RSVP with Ben at his contact information. And then our next chapter meeting, like I said, is Deborah Curry, and her presentation is mostly going to be focused on the longspur mint that is only found in a couple of places in Florida. It's a pretty rare plant, and it's a very lovely plant too. And always double check our website and Facebook. Sometimes short notice events come up, and we also advertise on Facebook some of the other chapters things that they're doing. And another activity that will be coming up in April is we'll be having a spring plant swap, native plants only, and we'll be putting out more information about that in a little bit. But start planning now. You can go out and see, now that everything's starting to green up, if there's any plants that you might want to divide or collect some seeds that are left over on the plants from winter. Start some cuttings maybe. But this gives you the heads up that you can start doing that now, and then you'll be prepared when things come around in April. So quick reminder, a couple of the things going on outside of the chapter. One is the Florida Native Plant Society license plate that they received approval for. This is a copy of approximately what it looks like, and you can find out more information. They have to pre-sell several, 3,000 I believe, before they can have them actually go out for production. So they're looking for people that are willing to make that pledge, and then once they get the appropriate amount, then they'll go into production. So there's not a whole lot of commitment there. I rather like this. I've got a couple of cars, one's a truck, and I think this will look perfect for it. And then the other thing going on is that Citrus County has just recently had a solar co-op become available in the county, and the county commissioners made a resolution to endorse the solar co-op. And if that's something that anyone is interested in, I'll put up a link later on where you can find out more information about it. It's free. You can just learn about it and see if that's something you're interested in. They're going to have a few webinars coming up, and you can find more about that on the website that I'll share later. So I believe I see we have one question that came up, pre-ordering on the license plate. If you go to the link that I provided, there's a page on our chapter website that shares some information about it. You can either go directly to the DMV and pre-order it there, or you can go online, and the Native Plant Society has set up a link on being able to pre-order it online. So if there are no further questions, we can adjourn the business for this month and get on to our featured speaker for this evening. So our featured speaker is a master gardener, a master naturalist, and a chapter member, Barbara McCormick, who has been doing Barbara's Bits for our monthly meetings. It was a regular feature before the meetings and then quickly became a draw in its own right. Barbara's fun and informative workshops have covered the spectrum from best garden tools to how ecosystems work. She also manages the Extension Office Native Demo Garden and helps out in their mixed garden of Florida-friendly plants, and our chapter assists with the Native Demo Garden. After serving and rising to become a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, her career turned to horticulture, and Barbara's wealth and breadth of knowledge comes from 27 years as a master gardener and 8 years working in the massive landscapes of Disney World. Her interest in natives came about when she moved to the woods and was educated by nature. Citrus County now gets to benefit from her experience and her sage advice. So tonight we'll learn about avoiding winter and spring pruning mistakes and how to be more successful with the new plants that we want to plant this spring. It's great to have you back with us tonight. So I'd like to bring you Barbara McCormick.
Hi, welcome to Barbara's Bits. This is a native plant program on planting, propagation, cutting seedlings, and dividing your plants out there for spring, getting ready for spring, cleaning up your old flowers. So, my name is Barbara McCormick, and it's been a while since we've had a program, so I thought this would be pretty neat to get in touch with the old friends. So, what's out there blooming right now? We have the Walter's Viburnum. You'll see a lot of this right now coming into bloom. It's one of the most butterfly and bee attracting flowers out there. It's all along the roadways. It is an understory shrub. It likes a lot of sun, but it likes some afternoon shade, protection from that sun. But it needs no care once established. It's evergreen, and it gives you the most beautiful spring. I believe it's the first one or the second one to bloom, along with the Chickasaw plum. Then we have the cherry laurel. This tree, if you have it and it's in bloom, it will be humming with bees and beneficial wasps. You'll also see butterflies and hummingbirds around it. It puts out a lot of flowers. It does have seeds that can become messy, so don't put this near any sidewalks or near too close to your house. But it's a beautiful native tree that gets a good size, probably 30 to 35 feet. The large leaf, large flower, Condardina, you'll see that it's in the mint family, and it has that little lip flower, light lavender flower. They're in bloom right now, and they are also evergreen. Then the coral honeysuckle's in bloom. As you can see back here, we have that. These aren't quite all the way open. They will open up so that the hummingbird can get in there and taste that sweet nectar. It also will attract bees and butterflies, but the hummingbird, this is one of her favorites. Yellow jessamine. This is an evergreen vine. The frost don't hurt it. I don't know anything that really hurts it. It can become overpowering, so be careful where you put this. I have a field of it almost, and it is one of the most beautiful things in the spring with the yellow flowers. And then we have the lyre-leaf sage. Where are you hiding? Where'd it go? Oh, right here in front. And you can see that this is a ground cover, and it will spread not only by seed but by runners. Very easy to transplant. It does like a little moisture soil, so you're going to find this in shadier areas where there might be a little moisture in the soil. And then of course our tropical sage. There's a pink one here and a red one. They're one of the best hummingbird and bee attractors and beneficial wasp. So that's what's blooming out there now, and you'll see more coming in. Spring is right around the corner, people. So what we're going to go into next is selecting your plants. When you go out to select plants, know your area. If you live in a sandhill, don't buy plants that want to live in a hammock. And if you live near the water, don't buy sandhill plants and try to grow them there. Know what you live in and buy plants that are suitable for that area. You'll be much happier, they'll be much happier, and you'll have a more beautiful garden. So when you go to select plants, you want, this is my personal belief, I like to buy plants that are in tight bud or that I can divide. And I'll show you an example of one that a lot of people won't buy it, but this one's going to make about 15 plants, and you can see that it's root bound. Generally, you don't want to buy a root bound plant unless you're going to divide it. So if you put this right in the ground like this, you're going to have a lot of problems. So you want to divide this one. So I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to chop that one up and plant it. So what we're going to do, I have a bed out in my yard, so I've used this table area here to show you what a bed might look like out in your yard. Generally, you'll have some sort of mulch. I like natural mulches, either leaf mold or pine needles. It allows the moisture to go through. It protects the roots from the sun. It also will provide some protection on a new plant that's being established. So all you do is go out to your area, pull that back, dig your little hole that you're going to have for your plant. A lot of times you're going to have to use a trowel or a shovel, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just using my hands. And then you take your plant. Now this is a cassia. I do like to remove weeds, and you can see that this one does not have a lot of root system. So don't go in and disturb those roots on something like this. You want to gently put it in the ground so that you don't hurt these tender roots, because on these roots they have hair follicles on them, and that's what's going to bring up the moisture. If you damage that, then the plant has to put out new roots in order to establish itself. So you want to set it in the soil, and you want to face it so that it's facing a good direction. Take off any dead wood. When you're putting it in, you want to use, if you can put a little leaf mold in there, that's not going to hurt it, but usually native plants don't even need a lot of amendment, but that will give it a little organic food. And I never plant a plant without water, so I always take a hose with me or a bucket if you can't get a hose to the area. And just flood that area until it's full all the way to the top. When you're setting your plant, and you want to make sure that your top of your root ball will be level with the soil that you're planting it in. So you don't want to have the plant too high, it'll dry out, or too deep that it'll suffocate. So it's critical that you have it at the same level as your soil. Then backfill that soil in, firming it up. Do not step on it. You do more damage to root systems by stepping on it. Just firm it up with your fingers till you have a little shallow there, and water it again. This is going to give your plant the best start. If you put a dry plant in the ground and you don't water it in properly, and you just allow the rains to do it, then it's going to dry out from the bottom, and it's going to be a slow kill. So it's going to start to decline over time and not establish. So you want to make sure it gets a real good start with a good wet root ball. Then level your soil around, put your mulch back around it, and not real tight against the trunk, just where it's going to protect the top of the root ball, and you water it for the third time. And whether you're dumping a bucket or using a hose, 3 times is probably the best plant. And even with trees, you might even do more than that. The critical part is to establish it. You can't use the hose really generous on the first day and then not use water on it for the next 2, 3, 4, 8 weeks. You need to establish it over a period of time until it can live on its own. And even then, you got to watch your droughts, because if we get a real hot summer and not a lot of rains, you're going to have to do a little more watering. So I'm going to show you how to do one more. And this plant is this is a cut leaf Rebecca or black-eyed Susan. And what people don't realize when they plant something like this is they don't clean up the brown and yellow leaves around the base. Get all those leaves from around the base. See all those brown leaves and yellow leaves? They're going to do nothing but hinder your plant and possibly cause a disease like botrytis, which your plant will be happy one day and it'll be laying over on its side the next day. It generally happens with leafier plants where that humidity builds up around the trunk. So you want to make sure that that's nice and clean and get rid of it. Don't just leave it out in your yard. Sanitation, you can defeat 80% of your problems with sanitation by cleaning up after yourself. So you can see that this one has pretty good root system. A couple weeds coming up, but that's a little too much weed, too tight. So you can just work your fingers in and just work that out so that the roots won't swirl around and continue to swirl around. You want it to go out into the soil. So you do want to take and loosen some of these roots up. You are doing a little damage, but you're doing less damage than leaving it the way it was. Okay? Some people will cut off the bottom, and I'm going to do that to one plant down here. But as you can see, now the roots are loose and they're able to get out of that circular motion. So again, set it in there so it's level with the planting of the ground. Backfill it halfway and get your hose. And then backfill it the rest of the way. Give it one more time so all that soil you put back in there is good and wet. Then you put your mulch out. Now on this one you're going to stay way away from the center. Just put it up to it, but don't cover that up, because with the humidity you're going to cause an environment for diseases to set in, and you don't want that. So there you go. That's how you would plant plants. Establish them. You want to watch their watering. I generally water them 2 days after I put them in, and then every 3 or 4 days after that for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the plant. Now this one is going to establish a lot quicker than the cassia, because the cassia is a tree. Small tree, but it is a tree, where this is just a ground cover, so it's going to establish a lot quicker. So just keep an eye on your plants and keep your hose out there, and you'll be a lot better for it. Hi, welcome to Barbara's Bits. This is a native. Okay, now we're ready for what we've all been waiting for all winter, spring cleanup. You can see a lot of new growth out there. This is a tropical sage, and you can see that the old growth is leggy and withering and turning yellow, where the new growth is nice and green and coming right up in the middle. So you want to take this old growth off, not only because it's unsightly, but also all that energy that's going to these branches from the roots could go to the new growth for producing flowers. So we're going to take this old growth off. And it's a process. No two plants are the same. You can use some of this for cuttings, and I have some cuttings that I'll show you later. But you want to take these really old ones all the way back to the ground. All the dead and all the last year's growth needs to come out so that new growth can take all that energy and sprout forward for springtime. On this particular plant, be real careful with the branches because they can be a little bit brittle. So you want to get all that cut back and out of there. And you see that the plant's getting happier already. So I don't want to cut it. See how much better that's looking? There is another plant in the back that I'm not going to prune. I'm only pruning the tropical sage. Almost got it all. Now you can see that even to the eye it's much better, and now all that energy that was going to this whole plant is now going to go to all this new growth, and it'll get up there and start to flower. Okay, we're going to move on to a few other plants and show you how to prune them. This is another sage, but I wanted to bring this one so you can see where the new growth comes out from. It can come out on the stem, but you have to be questionable about that because sometimes the wood is partially damaged. So generally you want the new growth to come from the very bottom of the plant. So you want to cut just above that new growth. Now obviously these aren't pulling energy, but they are unsightly. Now this plant can put all that energy to this plant, to the new stems and the new spring growth, and put them out there. This is, like I said, is going to attract a lot of butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds. Now this one is unique. This is actually a oblong twin flower, but a seed of a Coreopsis have actually two seeds of a Coreopsis have come into the area. Now you can dig these Coreopsis up and transplant them elsewhere. I'm not going to, because the Coreopsis is real healthy. I love that plant, and the twin flower is going to establish around this area anyway. But there is some old damage from the twin flower. See here? So you want to take out that dead wood. Just get the point of your clippers in there, hold on to the stem so you know where you're cutting it, and cut it right out. Okay, and you can see over here where the twin flower is starting to come up from the ground. It'll sometimes it dies back, sometimes it doesn't, but it'll spread out now for springtime. So that one's ready to go. This one is a Lakeside Sunflower, and there's a lot of dead in here, dead leaves and stuff. Just get that out of there, the yellow leaves. There's some Coreopsis coming up in it too, so I'm going to leave those alone. But there is some dead wood in there. It did die back, but that dead wood still is going to hinder the energy and the nutrients going to the new plant. Get that out, get out all the dead leaves so you have less area for diseases to set in. Okay, now we're going to prune the portaweed. You can see that it still has some old flower seed heads, so those have to come off, of course. They're not doing anything now, but leave these on during the winter because a lot of birds will feed from the seed. Also, there's seeds from beneficial insects inside this plant, so you don't want to get any cleaning up too early into the spring. Give those insects or beneficial insects eggs a chance to heal, to hatch out and grow. So you want to take it back to where there's new growth. I'm taking out all the dead. And just keep going on around. Don't leave any dead wood up there, even if it might make your plant look a little lopsided. Wait for new growth and you can shape it later on in the springtime. There you go. You can see now this plant has a good start. Now, if you want to, you don't have to, but you could sort of take these tips off, because what that's going to do is allow the leaves to break underneath this. It's not going to hurt taking these tips off. It's going to give you a fuller plant. So, all right, now we've got the spotted horse mint, Monardia. One of my favorite plants. This is a bee, butterfly, hummingbird attractor. And once you get this established, it will reseed, so you gotta want it. Or you'll be out there taking up seedlings or giving them away or transplanting them somewhere else. But I have this at my driveway and I just love it. Now, even though there's new growth here, I'm gonna take all last year's growth back, because you can see that it's coming in pretty thick down here in the bottom. And by taking this back, those will put up new spikes and go into the flowering season. This one smells so good too. It's in the mint family. You can use this for seasoning. Sort of like a pepper. And I know people that actually put it in their tea also. So now this is going to spread out, root in, and also reseed. So this is a colony plant. It's going to create its own little colony. That's a nice tight plant now. Once it puts in the ground, it's going to take off like gangbusters. Now here's a plant, like I told you, sometimes you get those plants that are root bound. And I like them that way because I divide them up. Take off last year's dead growth. As you can see, there's a lot of it. And it's already sprouted out for spring. I had to cut this out because of its being so root bound. I had to cut it out of the pot. Now with this one, I'm going to cut the whole bottom off because I'm going to cut it into chunks before I plant this one. Nice soil, so just throw this back in your yard somewhere in your garden that some other plant can live off of it. So now, when you do this, you can be really, really cautious and not cut in anything, but it really doesn't matter. You're going to want to cut. And I'm going to make this one plant, 4 different plants. then if you look at this, you don't want to disturb that part up there because that's actually new growth coming out. But kind of just loosen it up a little bit below that, just to give those roots a chance to get out of that spiral. Oops. And there you go. So that one plant that I paid for, I've got 4 different plants. And that will spread. You can see it spreads by underground roots. This is the, it's a sunflower, I believe. Or is this? I'm going to edit this one.
Don't know, but it's going to be nice.
Yeah. I don't know. You'll have to look at it, Gail. I thought I had a tag on it, but evidently I don't. Okay.
We'll put a banner on it.
Now when you say, a lot of people have said on Facebook,
Okay.
do I come up
Go
here?
ahead. Hang on. Pause for a sec, and let's...
Okay, now I know that people like to get free plants, and you can get as many free plants out of your own yard as you want, but you need to learn a few things. We grow native plants, and you know that a lot of native plants seed out and they come up where you don't want them to come up, in pathways too close to your other plants. So what we can do is take our little trowel and a bucket or a basket or anything, go out into your own yard and go around and look for plants that are out of place. You don't want to kill them off. I mean, you can treat them as weeds and weed them out, but you don't get new plants that way. So if you see a plant out of place, just go out there, take your trowel, go down underneath and dig it up with a little bit of soil around that root ball. Don't worry about the pine needles or anything. You want to come back and you want to put it in a pot. Or you can transplant them to a new area too. But you just take that very gently, firm it up in a pot, leave those pine needles right there. It's not going to matter. Once they establish in these pots, you can put them wherever you want them. Or like I said, you can put them anywhere in your garden. Just make a hole, dig that plant up, and once you have them in your bucket or whatever, just bring them back and tuck that right into that pot with all that organic matter still there. Firm it up. And these are Chapman goldenrods. So they are beautiful when they bloom, one of the prettier yellow blooming flowers. And you can put them in these pots there in the spring, and then late spring or early summer you can transplant them out and they will flower this year. So you just made yourself 3 new plants, and these plants would have been weeds. So then you go around the corner and you see some Coreopsis in it. Do the same thing. You might need to do a little bit wider cut around that, then go underneath, pick it up with the soil on it. You don't want to disturb those roots just as little as possible to get it out of the ground. Same thing, take it, make the hole, firm it up. The most critical thing, because we have disturbed these roots, is to make sure that we water these. Keep them watered for about 3 to 4 weeks, then let them grow and establish in these pots, and then transfer them down into the ground. So that's what's called transplanting new plants, just by going out and observing your own garden. Now more into propagation, where you can do cuttings. Cuttings are very, very simple. You find out what plant you want, go out there and take your cuttings. It's nice to keep them in some moisture because they will dry out relatively quick, maybe before you can get them into your tray. Mix up a tray of soil, and then you take your cuttings. Now, I'm going to show you on anise first. Some plants, herbaceous plants, which are plants that can sprout almost anywhere. They sprout really easily. They don't get a woody stem like some of the plants we were dealing with earlier. Now this one can get a woodier stem. You see where it goes from green stem to brown stem? Because of that, doing cuttings on these are a little bit different. It's critical to cut below a node. Now what a node is there's a bud right at the base of a leaf. See that little opening? So you want to take the lower leaves off, cut just below that node, leave some leaves on it, and that's your cutting. And you just stick it in some soil, firm it up, and keep it nice and wet. Now you don't want to do a lot of green wood. You want to get down to where there's a little bit of brown wood showing, because that's a hardier wood. So just stick them right in there. You can probably get 2 out of this one. The reason for leaving some of these leaves on is because you're going to spray these with water, keep them in a shady area until they produce roots. Now you can use something called a root tone, which will help you develop roots quicker. You don't really need to do that, as long as you get those nodes down into the soil. So there's our new cuttings of the anise. I'm going to show you a few more plants. This is a rouge plant. It gets a little red berry-like flower on the tips. Now this is herbaceous. You can see that the branch is flexible, so they don't get a real woody wood, hardwood. But because it's kind of wimpy on the ends, you want to take the tips out of these. The reason you take the tips out is because this is bringing up moisture, but it can't really sustain a lot of leaves. So you want to take off as much of that wimpy leaf as possible. And again, make sure there's a node below the soil level. Cuttings are very simple, and people get really scared of them. Don't. They're not all going to work, but what does work is nice. But make sure you're putting your labels in too, so that you know what you have. Because some of these leaves may fall off, but at least you're going to have a label there so you know what you have. So that was anise and rouge plant. This is the missing tag. There it is. Okay. This is the
Lantana.
Lantana, the button sage, Lantana. So now this has a little woodier stem, so you don't have to take the tips out. But if there are any flowers, take those off, because flowers are going to pull the nutrients and energy out of the plant, and you don't want it to do that. You want it to produce roots. Okay, then we have the tropical sage. Okay, so that's the red salvia. Again, a little bit of flower and weak tips, so you want to take them out. Make your cuts, pull the lower leaves off so the node is exposed to the soil. Okay. There's a piece of sage. This is your calamint. This is the smaller leaf mint. You don't really need to take the tips off, but if they start to wilt, go ahead and take them off. And again, pull off those lower leaves. Some of these have a little bit of weaker almost anything. We're using a tent peg. which makes a great one. The hole's wide enough to put your cutting in, but then you have to pinch it down. Oops, that one moved. Make sure you expose that bottom part and tuck it right in there. Then we have the Salvia Masala, which is a little ground cover with little tiny blue flowers on it. Great ground cover. And you can see here how tiny the flowers are. But because you're doing cuttings, you don't want those flowers. And then we have oblong leaf twin flower. Just pull those leaves off. Definitely use a dibble on these. They're very, very weak stem. Stick that stem in there, pinch it together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's easy way to do new plants. You have to keep these in the shade and well watered. Don't let the soil dry out, but it's more critical to keep those leaves wet. Keeping the leaves misted is very, very important on cuttings. They're going to absorb that moisture through the leaves until they develop roots. But that soil also has to keep wet. So you'll do this 2 or 3 times a day. Put it in a shady area out of direct sunlight and keep those leaves moist. And another form of propagation is from seed. You can gather your seed generally in the fall, let your flowers fade on the bush and turn brown. You can go out there with paper bags and shake them off in paper bags, or clip the tops of the flowers off, put those in paper bags, and keep them in a cool, dry area over the winter, and put them out in the fall, in the spring, excuse me. The first one we're going to do is bees balm, one of our smallest seeds. Bees balm is the spotted horse mint. Very, very tiny seed. You can see where the flowers used to be attached to the pod, and then the seeds are in that pod. So first thing you want to do is fix your tray with seed germinating soil, wet it down good, stick your tag in, and put a divider in. Now there's two purposes for these dividers. First of all, it's going to tell you that that plant that's coming up over there is not the plant coming up over here. Plus, it gives you an area to sprinkle your seed out at. And these are very tiny, so they're going to come up probably like hair on your head. But just sprinkle a number of them in there. And then the next stage is they're very, very tiny, so if you put too much soil on, they may not come up. So what I use is a sterile substance called vermiculite. And you just sprinkle the vermiculite over the top of the seed. It will cover it enough for the moisture to make contact with the seed, and the seed make contact with the soil. And you don't need a whole lot, just enough to cover that area. Another purpose of the vermiculite is when your seedlings come up, and a lot of people might notice when they do tomato seedlings, is they'll come up and they'll look great one day, and then the very next day they fall over at the base. That is a disease called damp off. This will prevent damp off. So the vermiculite is very, very important at this time. The cut leaf coneflower is the next seed we're going to put in, and we have already sectioned off from the bees balm for this one. And you can see that the seed is a little bit different, and the pod is different. So go ahead and put your next spacer in, and then sprinkle those seeds in there. And again, these are small enough seed that you just sprinkle it on top of the soil. Some of this is not seed, it's just debris from the seed from the pod, but don't worry about it. Don't try to separate it. What is seed will germinate and what's not won't. Again, cover that with vermiculite, and don't forget to put your label in so you know what you got there. Okay, so we're going to go on to frostweed. Frostweed's a great little flower. You can see the pod of that one. And there's a lot of debris in this one, but you can see where the seeds are. They're these little flat ones. See the dark gray flat ones? Those are the seeds. So again, put your spacer in. Sprinkle your seed out. Get back over here. Put your label in and sprinkle with vermiculite. And these are a little bit bigger, so make sure you cover all the seed. Okay. Now we're going to get into a couple other seeds, and some seed require scarification. Scarification is normally a process that's done in nature by rain, washing through rivers, rolling over rocks, being chewed by insects, being chewed by rodents. So the bigger the seed, some of those seeds may need to be scarified. You can put them out without scarifying them, but you're chancing them not germinating. So you want to put your label in. This is coral bean. It's a little bit larger seed. Oops. So you want to still put in your, oh, I see. This is the pod that the Cherokee bean comes in. Okay, now generally you just need to rub them on sandpaper. So you just put them out on your sandpaper. Use a glove because you don't want to sandpaper your hand. And you just roll them across the sandpaper. You can individually do them. So what you want to do is break that out of shell a little bit. Oops. And then where did Deborah go? You want to go down about 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch, and then close that one back up. You're not going to use the vermiculite on this one, because you want to cover this seed with soil. There you go. And we're going to get into a little bit bigger seed. Now these should have been soaked. I did not soak them, but these definitely are big seed. These are Buckeye seeds. Buckeye is a small tree, beautiful red bloom. And on these you want to kind of nip them a bit and soak them. Okay, so that's how you would do a Buckeye seed. Make a larger hole and then place that with the nip side up and cover it up. I'll do a couple of them. Ooh, that one's a bad seed. And sometimes you do get bad seeds. Okay, and then the last seed I want to show you is, and form of scarification, is on the Kunti seed. The Kunti seed has an outer shell on it, and they're going to be bright orange when they're on your plant. You're going to actually soak these overnight. And then you're going to roll them up and down the hardware cloth until you break that outer shell. You can add water to your or yeast to your water, and it'll help this seed germinate. So once that's off, and you can take the whole shield off, the whole orange off, and then there's a beige little seed inside. These are pretty ripe, so that it's not coming off right away, but there's a beige looking seed inside. I usually let the squirrels take these and put them around the yard, and they chew off the outer part, and then I just go transplant them where I want them. So once you have that, make your hole, pop that in there, and then cover it up. So that's another way of scarifying. And again, make sure you label it. Okay, once you get all your seeds into your tray and you're ready to set it into a place in the shade where the rain won't go in it. If this gets rained on, all those seeds are going to be washed out. So you have to be in a place where rain won't get into the tray. Then you just mist that soil down really, really, really good so that that seed can make contact with the soil. These spray bottles are really, really great because you don't wash the seed from its location. If disturbed during germination, chances are you're not going to get it to grow. And then keep the soil wet but not sopping. So you don't want it too wet, but you don't want it to dry out, especially with those seeds that are right at the top. And that's all it takes. Okay, out in our yard we may have some plants that form clumps. Clumps can be, especially in your grass families, clumps can be divided. Dig a clump of it out of the ground and then just go in with a knife and separate the bibs, which this would be a bib, okay, from the other bibs. And a lot of times you can pull them apart and you don't have to cut them. So you just separate them like this and then gently wiggle and separate the roots. You see that part of the roots go one way and part of the roots go the other way. Okay, see there? So once you get them all divided, then you can put them in pots or put them in the ground, but I like to put them in pots to get them established, and I know they're going to make it. You can, if you want, to take all this dead stuff out. You don't really have to right now, but it might look a little better. Have your soil in pots and pre-wet. Okay, you make your hole. Then you're going to take, now this is the part that people mess up. They'll just stick it in there and they'll have roots exposed. See how these roots are exposed? You don't want that. So what you do is you do a curl and tuck it up under, and then get all those roots down into the soil. Then bring your plant back up to the surface so the roots stay down, and firm it up. Okay, see, there's no exposed roots, and you've got a start of a new plant. So again, take a couple bibs from your pile. Okay, you see where the roots are? Make your hole in your pot again. Combine, tuck the roots up under, put it all the way to the bottom, and then pull the plant back to the top so that it is planted at the top, but you got to firm it up at the base. And then water them in good and keep them wet for about a month or so, and you'll see that they'll just start putting out new bibs. So this is love grass. Put your labels in and set them aside in a shady area, and you'll have new plants. Let's look at another one. Let's look at Coreopsis. That's another clumping plant that forms, they get a multiple plants coming from one location. So again, separate, take it out of the ground, separate it. You probably could just wiggle these and separate them. You'll see that some of them, like this one here, these are all on one root, so you don't want to cut through these if you can't help it. This is just one plant, even though it looks like it has multiple growing places. Same with this one. Okay, we got another little one over here, but because that's all it is, we're going to keep it with that other plant and do the same thing. Get our wet soil pots over, make the hole. And the wider the hole, the better, actually, because it's easier to control where your roots are going. But you don't want to jam these roots in. You kind of want to set them in there, tuck them in, and firm up around it. The more gentle you are on the plant, the easier that plant is going to be able to survive the transplant or separation. So make your hole. Take your plant, gather it together, make sure all the leaves are up and the roots are down. Tuck that right down into that hole gently and firm it up. So there, new Coreopsis. Let's do 3 of these. Okay, we're going to do 3, and the next plant we're going to do is blue-eyed grass. Blue-eyed grass spreads by seed. It also spreads by rhizomes. So you will always have, if you have blue-eyed grass, you always have clumps of it. Again, no need to use a shovel or anything. Just reach in there, and when you pull that out, you'll see where the rhizome came from the mother plant. This is the old rhizome. Then the new roots were developed on that new plant. So you take a few of those out, just give it a little tug, and you may have to cut that rhizome. Okay, let's see if I can get a better look at the rhizome that one's connected on. Knock some soil off so I can see. These are plants, they must come up by seed. Okay, here's what I'm talking about when the plant will put out this bigger root is actually a rhizome, is going to develop another plant out here. So this is one that's easy to divide, and I like to take 3 or 4 in one just to make it a better plant. Again, let your roots dangle, make your hole bigger, tuck all that in gently, and firm it up. Let's do a couple more. Oops. And there you are, new blue-eye grass. Okay, we got some wire-leaf sage here. Oops. Now, separate these. This is another one of them. Once you dig it up out of the ground, you kind of just want to loosen and tug to separate the plants. And a couple weeds growing in there. Okay, once you have your little plant out, hold the leaves up. Now on this one, I would take off any yellow or brown leaves off the base, just because you don't want to have any problems. Make your hole in your pot, tuck that in, and firm it up. This one's even got a little flower starting already. Again. And then keep these wet for 3 to 4 weeks, and they'll start to establish in these pots, and then you can put them anywhere you want in the yard, provided it's the right location for the plant. And that's division. Okay, the last type of propagation is layering, and there's 2 types of layering. There's ground layering and air layering. So if you have a coral, honeysuckle, or the yellow jessamine, you can take a pot up to that plant, take one of those branches down from the plant, remove some leaves, and make a small scratch on the bottom between 2 nodes, just down to the cambium, which is the layer between the xylem and the phloem, which is your bark and your wood. That layer is where reproduction is going to take place. So you'd bend that down, make a little trench in your soil, put that down with the scraped out part that you cut on the bottom, and then weigh that down. Now this end would be attached to a plant. What's going to happen is roots are going to develop there, and a new plant will form here. So after you see new growth starting coming up on this side for 2 or 3 weeks, you can cut that off from the mother plant. This branch goes back to the plant, and you have a new plant. You can also do it very easily with the yellow jessamine too. Just take the leaves off right below that node, just scrape that bark off, make your little trench, lay that down in there, make sure that there's an inch of soil or so, ½ inch or an inch of soil around it, and then weigh it down. Rocks work good. You can use pieces of wood or whatever, and then again it's going to develop roots, and you're going to get new growth over here, which will be your new plant. So that's ground layering. Then we're going to do something called an air layer. This is a Hearts are Bursting, and it's always had this real long strapping branch that got some cold damage this year, but I'm not worried about that. So what I want to do is make my plant fuller at the base. So I don't want to cut this off and throw it away because it's a perfectly good plant. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take a node, and you can see the new growth coming right there. Okay, so below that node by about an inch, you're going to cut very shallow all the way around, and then you're going to go above that node about an inch, and you're going to do the same thing. Then what you're going to do is take all that bark between those two cuts you made, take all the green off. If you don't have a space that wide and you don't get all the green out, what's going to happen is the wood, the wound is going to heal or bridge from one location to the other. So you now make sure you get all that out so that there's no connection to the plant. Now if you leave it just like this, obviously this part's going to dry out because it can no longer get water from the bottom, from the roots, and it's going to turn brown and fall off. But you're going to make a new connection, and you're going to do that by use of sphagnum moss. So I have prepared here aluminum foil with the shiny side up, and then you're going to put a piece of saran wrap inside that foil, and then fold all your ends over. Sort of capturing that saran wrap inside. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take really, really sopping wet sphagnum moss. Okay, and you're going to make a real nice thick bed of moss right there. Then where you made your cut removal, you're going to carefully wrap this, making sure that you cover all the way to the bottom so that it's on the, you can't see this, making sure that the white is inside this wrapped up area. Squeeze it on the bottom so that it's nice and tight, won't fall down the branch. Then what you're going to do is on the top, form this part so it stays together, and then you're going to cup it so that the top is like a little pocket for water to go through. So now this part of the plant is going to get water from the root through that wet sphagnum moss. And what's going to happen in there usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 months. Roots will develop from the top part of your white area. Sometimes you can put a wire around the bottom to keep it from sliding. Okay, and in this case I'm going to have to stake it because it's a little bit wimpy. Okay, so that's what's called an air layer. Then you want to make sure that you label your air layer, and these tags are really great for this because they have a wire connection, and these are embossed labels, so you do an imprint. You're not going to read it, but you'll be able to read it. It's called Hearts a Bursting. Okay, so you've labeled it. Make sure you twist here once, then you go around loosely, usually higher up, and then once, so that you're not tightening on the bark, you're just making sure that it is secure. Okay, So if you got a rain season or you had irrigation, this is going to gather water here. It's going to go down to where the root zone is going to develop and form that root zone, making a new plant. If you don't have irrigation, you may have to keep an eye on this moss to make sure that it stays wet. Because if it dries out, two things can happen. Your plant is obviously going to die, but ants move in. So you don't want those little black ants in there. And that's what's called an air layer. Now, when you remove this, you're going to remove it at this node down here. Because if you leave this stem that it's dangling on, that will just turn and rot out and cause diseases or problems with your plant. So you want to cut it at an angle above that node, which is this leaf here, and that'll be part of the new plant. Then when you plant this, you're going to cut it at the bottom of the root zone. So this part will be thrown away eventually, but it's critical on this cut for the existing plant. And I've been able to do 6 and 7 foot branches with air layering. You just make a bigger moss area and you leave it on 3 to 4 months. But then you can cut it off and plant it right in the ground. So hopefully you've learned something today. And these plants, these plants may be available in the plant swamp coming up with the Native Plant Society for Citrus County. Thank you very much.
So that was, I've got a bunch of questions, and we already have a bunch of questions from people who are in the chat room right now. But I would love to welcome Barbara. Hey, it's great to see you. How you been?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So to start with, I think I'm going to work through the comments backwards so that people's memories are best. But Ben wanted to ask during the ground layering, should the flowers be removed like you would remove them for, cuttings or anything like that, or does it not really even matter?
It won't matter on those two plants because those two plants are very aggressive plants, but it would matter on some of the other plants. That you can do that even with woodier plants as long as the branch is flexible and can be bent down to the ground. But yeah, it would be beneficial to take that off because it is going to pull some energy.
Okay. And Donna was wondering, when you were doing the division segment, the plants that you were using, which I can't even remember other than like lyre sage, but were they for zone 9 and 10, or were you just using plants from our area, which is kind of 9A?
I think they'll grow in both areas as long as the lyre leaf sage has some bit of a moisture soil. But all the grasses that we used will grow in that area, in both areas.
Yeah, and some plants, obviously, they have soil requirements. Yeah.
Right, and definitely check in your own area before you try to do a plant so you're just not disappointed.
Yeah. And then when you were doing the Buckeye part where you were nipping it, Gail Taylor said that she soaks her beans before overnight and then found they're really easy to scarify. But you had mentioned to soak them.
I did mention that in the film, and I should have soaked them. I just wasn't thinking, I guess.
Yeah, I actually had a similar thing where I wasn't thinking about soaking them. I put some pits into water to soak and then kind of got distracted. And 2 weeks later came around. So all of my seeds were rotted. And I hadn't even scarified them or anything. It was just they were rotted out.
Yeah, I wouldn't soak a seed more than 1 to 2 days.
So Donna also had asked when you were talking about the seed starting, were you saying vermiculite? And then I was kind of thinking, where do people get vermiculite?
Did you get that question? Oh, vermiculite. You can generally find it in one of the box stores. Used to be able to buy it in a 4-foot bag, but now it's more like a small 8-quart or something. But you can buy vermiculite and perlite. Perlite allows aeration in soils, where vermiculite will hold moisture, and that's why we use it to cover the seed. Not only is it sterile, but it'll keep the seed a little moisture till it germinates.
Yeah. I think I asked you this before because I had a problem when I was starting seeds that I started with dry soil and then I tried to wet the soil afterwards, and I would end up like washing my seeds away. But on both seeds and on cuttings, it would be better to start with wet soil kind of first, right?
Definitely wet soil, especially with seeds, because you won't be able to get that soil wet enough after the seed is on there without washing them out or sinking them too deep. So yes, definitely start with wet soil.
And how do you store your seeds if you gather them like a season earlier?
Some seeds, I know that the paintbrush needs to be stored in a cooler area than some of the other wildflowers. So I've had people tell me to put them in the refrigerator in a dry paper bag. But I just store mine in paper bags inside an air-conditioned area where it's cool enough, but the seed is staying dry. They'll never store wet seeds. They'll just mildew.
That was my very first seed starting mistake, is I put them in the refrigerator in plastic bags.
And especially if you get them when the pods are still green or when the seed is too fresh, I always let mine dry out in open air for 3 to 4 days before I put them in the paper bag, if they still have green to the calyx or something, because that will cause molds.
And from backstage, Sue asked early on when you were doing the pruning segment, she wanted to know that, you know, when the plants get leggy in the summer, do you kind of do that same hard pruning?
Not necessarily a hard pruning because of the stress of the environment at that time. Hot sun, a lot of times dry during the summertime unless we have a hurricane season. But you can cut your plants back 1/3 of the height anytime during the year. But remember that at certain times of the year, you'll be sacrificing your buds. But I know that lantanas and even when the dune sunflower gets a little leggy, you can cut those back and they'll quickly return back to flowering.
And we also had a couple of people wanted to comment and say thank you. Gail wanted to say that, you know, we're so lucky to learn from you. And Tina also said that she wanted to say thank you. That was a lot of great information. And
well, thank you. I'm happy to get out there and teach again. It's been a long, long time.
And I think this was Sue again. She said, what do you recommend for spring cleanup on grasses like cordgrass and gamma grass, you know, detaching the grass? What do you do?
It varies from plant to plant. I do very, very little to muhly grass. I just hold it up and trim off the bottom that is coming in contact with the soil, because you're going to have possibly some disease situations in. On gamma grass, I'm constantly cutting them around more of a V shape 3 or 4 times during the year. And on love grass, you can almost go in there and just pull it out. So it all varies. I don't adhere to the sharp pruning of grasses where they just cut them into a little square. I think, especially muhly grass, it becomes an ugliest grass after that. Keep it as natural as possible. Like pretend you're a rabbit chewing around the edge.
That's a good analogy, I think. And one of the things that I noticed when you were doing the planting demonstration, you had pine needles that you're using for mulch, and that's a nice airy kind of mulch. But I think also sometimes people are using nuggets or whatever. When you're doing a fresh planting like that, should you cover the area that you just planted? Should you like leave a little gap between the plant?
Leave a gap, because especially with woody or chip mulches, not so much with pine mulch, pine chip, pine nuggets, but with wood mulches, it'll stay on the trunk. And if it gets a good rain, it'll stay too moist on that trunk, and you can get a lot of diseases and molds growing that way. So I don't mulch right up to my trunk of my plants at all. But I do cover the area around the plant, because that sun's going to be baking down on that new soil. And if it's exposed, it can burn new roots or the surface roots.
And when you were doing some of the division and you had cut up the plants, and then even some of the other, just you were pulling plants apart, should anybody really be afraid of how a small root, like, you know, oh, there's not enough root there? Or, I mean, is there like a minimum amount of root that maybe you should have?
Most plants will take with just a little bit of root. You got to remember that that's an area of active tissue development or separations, like division. So the cells are constantly dividing at that area, putting out new grass bibs. So it's just a small amount of root. I know that a lot of people will cut most of their roots off. But you got to remember, if you cut all those roots off, then you have to watch your watering a little more.
I usually try to water my plants before I either do a planting, just the pot. I'll water the pot, or if I'm doing a division, just because I always thought that hydrating the plant before kind of stressing it might be a good idea. Is that even a thing?
Well, by watering it, I water mine usually the night before I'm going to plant. That way the root ball is nice and wet. And it's critical to get it off to the right start by keeping not only the soil wet, I usually water out from my plants, especially if I'm planting just in strictly sand, until the areas a foot or more out from where I'm putting the new planting in is wet when I first start, because if it's hot and dry, then the plant's not going to want to put its new roots out into that. So watering is very critical, but never, 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 ever water or plant a dry plant.
Okay, one more time. Never water a dry plant?
No, never, never plant a dry plant. Make sure that they're watered.
Yeah. I recently started a new thing with my cuttings because I'm horrible at cuttings. And I, instead of putting them in trays and watching so many of them die, I just go and I put them out in the ground next to another plant and I water it for a while. And then next season, I'm surprised that something's there and it's like a little gift. I forgot all about it.
Yeah, well, doing cuttings, the bigger the cutting, the harder the developing of that root system. But you can use just pots and stick them in pots. You don't have to use trays. But you can use root tone, and it's a natural forming chemical that the plant actually produces. So you're just kind of giving it a little extra of that, and you can get roots quicker, but you can also cause the bottom of the stem to knob and not produce roots. So that's the reason that I don't use it. I'd rather throw away some that dried out and didn't work and get some that did, than to use root tone on a plant that doesn't need it and lose them all.
Yeah. And I haven't done cuttings lately, so I haven't tried the thing that I learned from you during one of your last maintenance days out at the extension, because usually you teach people about all of this. And I remember you said that taking off the very growing tip, the end growing tip, can help because there's hormones in the growing tip that prevent it from rooting.
Not only is it very, very wimpy growth, so the plant is surviving only on what moisture it gets from its leaves and from that wet soil it's sitting in. So if it's got to sustain something that's wimpy, that's going to need water all the time, you want to take that off. But by taking that tip off also, you remove a chemical that the plant produces called auxins. And that will allow the plant to produce leaves below that cut. So you'll get a fuller plant.
Well, we have run out of our questions for the evening, and this was so informative. I'm glad you were able to do it. It's been a long time, and we've really missed having Barbara's bits around. Hopefully when we're back in the fall and we can be meeting in person, so we'll be able to do it in person with you. And
right.
You'll have to start planning now for what you're going to do in the fall.
Okay, I'll get some stuff together.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Barbara. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening, and I hope you learned something, and happy propagating.
So have a good night, everyone. I hope you learned something, and that we will see you soon at one of the volunteer events or at one of the activities that we have scheduled coming up. Like I said, send us an email, citrusnps@gmail.com, or you can call us, and we'll be waiting to hear from you. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Happy planting.